So it all started with a birthday party. Julie Keith's 4-year-old was about to turn 5 and she wanted a party. Julie went up to the attic where she had stored the party decorations she had bought a few months earlier at Kmart. This was to be a Halloween-themed party. So she unpacked ghosts and goblins along with a set of 17 foam tombstones branded as being totally ghoul. There's a lot of puns in today's service. Then, as she tells it, from between two tombstones, a folded up piece of paper fell on the floor. Her daughter picked up the note and handed it to her, thinking it was part of the instructions. Neat handwriting in English and Chinese filled the lined white paper. One of the edges was ripped. She did not know it then, but this note would wake Julie up from her sheltered life and make her realize how much her actions affect people the world over. The note read, "If you occasionally buy this product, please kindly resend this letter to the World Human Rights Organization." It went on to detail punishments and abuses of people in a place called Masanjia, and it promised that thousands of people here who are under the persecution of the Chinese Communist Party government will think and remember you forever. The fall air suddenly turned icy. Her daughter could not read yet, but she could read her mother's face, riven in concern and bewilderment. The letter's steady tone of voice belied the shocking horrors it described. Julie was filled with questions. Torture? Punishment? Innocent believers put in prison? Thousands will think and remember me? Who wrote this note, she wondered, and how did it end up in a box of Halloween decorations? In this age of misinformation and wild publicity stunts, she wanted to verify this before believing any of it. Her Google search turned up what she hoped it wouldn't. Masanjia labor camp is known as a place of nightmares among Chinese dissidents, and it appeared the note was going easy in its description. She learned that human rights defenders and spiritual believers such as Buddhists and Christians at odds with the Chinese Communist Party's way of thought are sent to these places for re-education, a euphemism for brutal torture, sexual abuse, and brainwashing until they sign a contract promising they will change their beliefs. Julie realized she could not just stand by and do nothing. She shared the note on Facebook and with media outlets, prompting exposés and a media firestorm that led to the release of some of China's prisoners and the eventual abolishment of that camp. Still, she second guesses her decision. Some people told her that because she publicized the letter, people in Masanjia would be punished. She was told that she should have minded her own business. She wondered and worried about whether she had endangered people halfway around the world or upset the Chinese government, and perhaps she had. Despite this awakening, she did not fully understand the consequences at the time. It wasn't until she met Sun Yi, the man who wrote the SOS note and risked his life to slip it into a box to be delivered a world away, that she really began to appreciate the impact of her actions. Sun Yi is a soft-spoken, kind-hearted person who maintained his composure and quiet strength through horrors that one letter could never encompass. He had been detained for 2.5 years for practicing Falun Gong, a meditation practice outlawed by the Chinese government. He refused to give up his beliefs, and he paid a steep price. Julie says that Sun Yi, who she met while a documentary film was being made about their story, has changed her life for good. Today, the thrill that she once got from the discounted decorations she bought could not feel more dissonant now that she knows the true human cost of that feeling. She now is much more mindful of the hands that have manufactured most everything she owns. She wonders to what degree human suffering is built into the things that she buys. In short, she has become much more aware of the world around her. Her unexpected encounter with a note sent halfway around the world has changed her life forever. It was a moment that forced her to understand her place in the world in a radically different way, to behold that she is an active and responsible part of life's interdependent web. She discovered, as the conservationist John Muir put it, when we try to pick out anything by itself, we find that it is hitched to everything else in the universe. There is, of course, no magical place set apart from life's great web. What touches the life of a person in China or a lion cub in Kenya or a redwood in BC affects us all. In both beautiful and sometimes bewildering ways, we belong to something so much bigger than ourselves. And yet, so often we are oblivious to this most obvious fact, to the point that we think little of purchasing a set of 17 foam tombstones, and certainly fail to see the irony that in the process we are digging our own graves. I do believe this is changing. I know it is for me, and I know it is for many of you. The millions of people who took to the streets on Friday to demand action on climate change give me hope that the great turning is in fact underway. As some have noted, the moment we are in is less about the sheer numbers of people protesting and more about the deeper shift in our thinking, the change of heart that makes an enduring difference, the transformation of conscience that forever alters how we understand our place in the universe. Such a shift requires of us a different response, a different way of being, a different way of relating to the world around us. None of this, of course, is new. In many ways, the call to change our awareness is weaved into the fabric of the world's great religions. While each of the major faith traditions differ from the others in sometimes significant ways, it is true that many hold forth a vision of the golden rule as a guiding virtue, that we are to do to others as we would have them do to us. But fundamental to this capacity is the ability to truly see each other, to behold another being as the sacred embodiment of life itself, and to know that our well-being is deeply linked with theirs. This awareness leads on to a very different way of living. And it must be said that it is not necessarily the easier path, not in our world today as it is. I've been reflecting recently on what are called the 7 social sins. They're often attributed to Gandhi, who made them popular, but they were first spelled out from the pulpit of Westminster Abbey in 1925 by a priest named Frederick Lewis Donaldson. These 7 social sins are wealth without work, pleasure without conscience, knowledge without character, commerce without morality, science without humanity, religion without sacrifice, and politics without principle. To be sure, there's a sermon in there, or a series of sermons. A friend of mine joked this week that that should be the name of my autobiography someday. There's a sermon in there. Apparently, I say that a lot. But nearly a century on, this list of sins is relevant as ever, and the antidote is much the same. Our need to move to know ourselves as part of something bigger, to appreciate that we belong to life's great web, and to accept that with our belonging comes real responsibility. I recently read a powerful account that brought home what this looks like. Lily Seville was in the UK visiting Manchester with a bit of time to spare on a cool, sometimes rainy morning that reminded her of home. She had turned on Pokemon Go on her phone, and the game led her to a small square where she found, to her dismay, an enormous statue of Abraham Lincoln. She wondered what a statue of Lincoln was doing in northern England. But fortunately, she says there was a large blue sticker that was somewhat haphazardly stuck onto the base of the statue that said something along the lines of "Talking Statues of Manchester," and it had a QR code with no further explanation. And so, curious to know more, she scanned the QR code with her phone, and almost instantly her phone started ringing. She took the call. There was no preamble, no explanation, just a man's voice saying, "To the working people of Manchester." The voice then continued in beautiful, archaic prose to praise the workers of Manchester and thank them for their courage and sacrifice. It seemed to be a letter, and when it came to an end, it was signed Abraham Lincoln. She then says that when he had finished uttering his name, President Lincoln hung up on her. She found it both tantalizing and odd that President Lincoln did not bother to list the brave acts or to sum up the sacrifices made. But then she wondered, why would he? The people of Manchester, after all, knew what they had done. Fortunately, after the president hung up on her, a screen popped up offering several links to learn more. And so there in the drizzle, she read an amazing story and wondered why she had never heard it before. What she learned was this. During the U.S. Civil War, the North imposed a naval blockade on the South. The economic hardship this caused was an important factor in the North's victory. What most people don't know is that the blockade also badly hurt the people of Lancashire. At that time, the mills of northern England produced the fabric that clothed much of the world. 75% of all of the cotton grown on southern plantations was sent to Lancashire, where it was spun, dyed, and woven. A year into the war, the embargo found northern England in real distress. 60% of its mills were shuttered. Thousands of people were without work. The desperate, wealthy mill owners started lobbying the government to send the British Navy to break the blockade and let the cotton through. And then a truly amazing thing happened. The workers themselves organized a mass meeting in the Manchester Union Hall to discuss the matter of those working class people who had the very most to lose, and then they chose to refuse cotton grown by enslaved hands. The blockade held, and the people did indeed lose. In one town alone, 5 out of 39 mills continued to operate. People went without fuel for heat. There was widespread starvation. Families lost their homes. And still, an ocean and a world away from a war in a place they had never seen, the people of Manchester chose to live and die by their values. They would not support slavery. Lincoln's letter of thanks was followed at the end of the war by ships loaded with food and supplies for the people of Lancashire, given in gratitude by the people of the U.S. I wonder what it must have been like for the workers of Lancashire to cast votes against their own material well-being, to vote to strike, knowing as a result that they themselves would struggle to survive. But then I consider the question of conscience, and it all makes sense. How much harder would it be to continue to spin and dye and weave the cotton picked by slaves, to hold in their hands a literal thread in the web of life that linked them directly to the oppression of others? Holding these two complicated stories in my heart in recent weeks, the story of the desperate note tucked between styrofoam tombstones and the story of the sacrifice of the mill workers in Lancashire, has been slowly reshaping my relationship with the everyday objects that pass through my own hands. My shirt made in Indonesia, my toothbrush manufactured in China, my avocado grown in Mexico, and my tomato harvested by Mexican laborers in Leamington. For better and often for worse, I belong to all of this, and so do you. Many of us can and do endeavor to make more ethical choices in how we spend our resources. And yet it is nearly impossible for us, embedded in the privilege that comes with living in Canada, to fully escape the most harmful ways in which we are connected to people around the planet. And yet that does not take away our responsibility to confront our collective social sins and to seek to make things right. This can happen in myriad ways, from pressing for action on climate change or building schools to refusing to buy goods from places where human rights are violated. These outward deeds, though, must ultimately be rooted in a real change of heart, in a shift from me to we, in the turning from the self-centered concerns of ourselves as individuals to a wider concern for the welfare of all. For this is what it means to belong to something bigger than ourselves, to know in our heart of hearts that we are connected through and through with all of life. With this knowledge comes the call to serve life through the tiny everyday actions that make us who we are. Friends, we hold the whole world in our hands, not alone, but linked arm in arm with one and all. May we strive on to do so with care for all that is our life.